brief overview of our time together. So as Cassandra mentioned, I'm a psychologist. I work in private practice in that Concordia. And at any point in this presentation, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I can answer them as I go. And I'll leave a couple minutes at the end as well in case anything comes up for you as we continue. So we're going to learn strategies for coping with failure. We're going to practice how to enhance our goals and really kind of ground ourselves in what's meaningful for us throughout this presentation. And I just want to kind of prepare you with sort of this approach was that we're looking at through a self-compassionate lens. So if you can take a second and think about yourself and your experience and your previous experience with reaching your goals. What happens when you don't reach your goals? How do you respond? And I'll give you a couple seconds just to consider maybe the last goal that you didn't reach. One of the things that happens when we don't reach our goals is that oftentimes we're not just grieving the fact that we didn't reach our goal, we're also grieving the dream that came with it, the expectations that we had, and this can lead into a lot of rumination and avoidance in the future. We think about what could have been, and we oftentimes motivate ourselves with shame, and that becomes really, really difficult for us to hold. This is why self-compassion is a huge kind of key into how do we respond to I would say you were talking about the word failure today, but some people would say learning opportunity or difficult challenges. One of the things that I've noticed too in my clinical work and in research is that perfectionism and worry often really drive our goals when we're not grounded in self-compassion. So thinking also about what motivated your goals, especially the ones that you didn't reach. What was pushing you forward in this direction, and then what happened? So really looking at the whole in your analysis of your post goal reaching, even when you succeed, not only when you fail, looking at what motivates me, what went well, what went wrong, and that can really help you in optimization of your goal setting process. Those are really things that you can think about as we kind of go throughout our presentation, but I'm going to give you some really like clear, I guess, exercises to help you clarify your direction and the steps in which you want to go. Especially, I noticed in the Kahoot, some people are talking about finishing your master's or getting into grad school. These goals can be this goal setting strategy can be really helpful to accomplishing these big career and life goals. So asking yourself too, especially when goals went wrong, were my expectations too high? Were they realistic? What happened here in the process of that? Was I focused on only the result? What was the process like for me in reaching these goals? And were these goals meaningful? One of the exciting things about failure or learning opportunities is that they can really bring us into another direction and it can lead us to an even more meaningful experience. So here, this is a very old picture. I'm sitting kind of in the middle of this rowing crew boat, and I was a college rower, and rowing was actually a surprise for me. I went to school for soccer and ended up being on the crew team, and it ended up being like a huge life-changing event for me to actually grieve the loss of soccer and move into rowing. It also taught me a lot of really good skills in terms of how to apply goal setting to reaching my goals. What was difficult is that for me in athletics, it was quite easy to put in the work and then see the results. Whereas when we're thinking about life goals or goals that are maybe connected to things that are less tangible, that was much more difficult. So actually, when I was in university, I had for the first time I had to withdraw from one of my classes, and I felt so embarrassed by it. I was full of shame. It was a biology class. I loved biology. It just made no sense to me. But when I looked at sort of what was happening, I was going into class right after rowing practice. I would fall asleep because we would practice at like 5, 6 a.m. I would fall asleep in half of the classes. And I just really wasn't connecting with the material. Like there were big reasons why I wasn't succeeding in this class. And so I met with the prof. We talked about all the different like options. I got a tutor. I did all the things. And really, at the end of the day, I had to withdraw from the class. And one of the biggest barriers to my success was in part rowing. And I love to row. And it took up so much of my time and my energy and my efforts. And I just wasn't present to the biology class. So what happened is after that, I actually ended up transferring to another university and choosing to focus on my academics and move into a different phase of my athletic career, which is really moving towards yoga and doing personal training and doing things that were more meaningful for me. I asked myself the question, what's my future? Do I want to try to make the Canadian national team, or am I, looking at a career in a field that I care about and that I love? And so I was clear with myself that it wasn't in my future to eat, sleep, row. And that was I mean, I could talk about this for a long time, but grieving my athletic career was a really big part. It did, though, lead me to much more meaningful and, I mean, my calling, right, in psychology. So a little story to kind of see how goals can drive us, they can motivate us, but when we're really connected to what's meaningful to us, we can go into a much deeper sense, and it gives us courage to deal with the grief that comes when we don't meet our goals. So, if we're thinking of a self compassionate mindset and a lens for us and for our performance and for our goals and for reaching kind of the things that we care about in life, self compassion is a really important key. What happens with self compassion is when we're faced with difficulty, we respond to ourselves in a much different way. We may have learned, and oftentimes I guess, in our society today, we learn how to motivate ourselves through past experiences, through adults around us, through coaches, teachers, people who are around us. And sometimes we can integrate an inner talk that can be really painful and really, I guess, harsh with ourselves. Self compassion doesn't say, oh, without a doubt, you're always the best and I'll love you forever. Self compassion says, I'll love you forever despite everything and with everything in your wholeness. So, this idea of self compassion is a very mindful place because you have to look inside of yourself and ask yourself and notice how you're responding to life and the things that are coming in front of you. As you notice the things that you're going through, that's the mindfulness piece. You can start to remember that it's part of a common human experience to have difficulties and to struggle and to fail and to not succeed. And that puts perspective. And on top of that, you're able to say, okay, well, this has been a really difficult experience. Like it's been really hard for me to let go of rowing and to move into my field of psychology. It's okay that I'm grieving this experience, and it's really painful for me. But that doesn't mean that I'm an awful person. It means that I'm a full person experiencing a full life. Self-compassion has lots of different benefits to it. I mean, you can read through the list really quickly. And today, what we're talking about is resilience and using it to cope in front of failure. And a lot of research on like self-compassion at work, so that was my thesis topic, showed that in being self-compassionate, we're actually more able to see what's happening, have perspective, and implement behavior changes in a much more quick way rather than staying in rumination and kind of holding on to the things that we are holding on to. We feel less frozen. We feel much more empowered to make choices and move forward. So, I mean, I don't know if any of you were here at my self-compassion for high performers talk last time. This may be a little bit repetitive, so I'm going to fly through it just so that we don't stay too long. But if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. So when you're faced with failure, you can screenshot this or write these questions down. These are some questions that you can journal about, or you can ask yourself through a mindfulness practice, or even have this conversation with someone that you care about. If your friend had the same experience with a difficult experience or a failure, what would you say to them? For example, we have someone who's completing their master's. I used to run the PhD support group in the previous university that I worked on, and I had all of these, doctoral students around the table, and honestly, mostly everybody struggled with finishing their thesis, and they were so hard on themselves. But hearing from their peers and colleagues, supporting them, asking them questions, being curious, looking at what their barriers were, finding objectives together, and leaning into what was meaningful was really powerful for them. And we can do this with ourselves, asking ourselves what we would say to a friend to find a key for what would be useful for us. Same thing, we could ask ourselves, what would a compassionate loved one say to me? So thinking about someone who's wise and compassionate in your life. In my life, I have a mentor. She's 75. She's the most wise, loving person that I know. And sometimes I ask myself, what would Leave say to me? And then there's also an exercise that you can do is imagining a council that would be in your mind or that lives in your body or around you, and have different members. Some of my clients that I work with even develop like, will invite Yoda, or one of my clients had a swan. So it can be kind of a little bit of abstract, but what would compassionate images or people say to support you and advise you when you're faced with this failure or this difficulty? These are a few strategies that you can use to kind of tap into that self-compassionate lens.